All right, so monetary policy. First off, what is it?
Policy or the Fed?
All right. How the Fed fixes the economy. First off, how do they do it?
Can't say the money system.
How does the Fed play with money?
With security, buying and selling.
All right, so they can buy and sell securities. What else can they do?
Set the rate, set the,
What's it called?
I knew you were gonna say
There's the R.
Well, that's the other one,
That's
right?
the
They
other
can
one.
also set the R,
Yeah,
right? Remember, they're pirates, right? So they can,
And the discount rate.
the discount rate.
discount.
And what's the discount rate again, folks?
It's
How
the
much?
interest rate the Fed gives to the bank.
Right. What the Fed charges banks to borrow overnight reserves, right? So these are the three things that the Fed uses to muck with.
Can you say that, Mark?
Yes.
Really? I'll put that on my test.
Muck with them too, right? So that you're not saying the other word that sounds like muck.
Duck.
Exactly. I
Puck.
can't say that word.
Puck.
Okay, so the question then is, how does that work? How does playing with the money supply adjust the economy?
Specifically up or down, is that what you're asking?
Either one. Let's go with, say they want to, make the economy grow. How would they do it?
Increase the money supply.
How does that work?
Lower the discount rate.
Well, if they increase the money supply, how does it work?
Well, it puts more money in the,
I know. Does that mean that people just spend more money because they have more money?
No, it makes money, it makes
Banks
more
more
loanable
easily
assets for the banks.
Okay, so if they have more loanable assets, what do the banks do?
Loan more easily.
How do they loan more easily?
Oh my God.
How do they do it? How does a bank make more loans happen?
They decrease their interest rate.
They lower the interest rate. Yes, exactly. So you are going to give me a graph that says price and quantity, right? The price of money is the interest that you pay on it, right? So here's the demand for money. Here's the supply of money. Whatever, $10 trillion. And when the Fed increases the money supply, what happens?
The interest rate goes down.
Exactly. So at $10 trillion, interest rates were hovering at around 3%. And in fact, usually this is around where the discount rate was sitting at back in 2010, 3% roughly.
You can buy a bunch of securities from the banks have more money.
Yep, and so all the banks say, great. Well, let's lower the interest rates down to about 2% because we've got all of this extra cash on hand. We don't have a whole bunch of treasury securities because we sold them all to the Fed because they kept buying them. They kept calling us and saying, hey, Bank of America, sell us more securities. And they say, oh, Jesus, really?
So just because the Fed lowers the discount rate to the banks doesn't mean that interest rates for us, as the borrowers,
Are going to fall?
Are gonna fall.
Not a guarantee. Usually it will. And the reason why is because
I was mixed up with that.
banks will have more money and they will probably reduce their interest rates. No guarantee.
Yeah, I was
Right.
mixed up there. I thought if the Fed lowered the interest rate, the bank had to.
They don't have to. Nope. But it does work almost 100% of
Hand
the
in
time.
hand.
Yeah, Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get there, but even when the Fed changes the discount rate by 1/4%, that's enough. That banks will be like, wow, it's that much cheaper for us to get money? Kiana's got to be worth it. We'll lend to her.
At a lower interest rate.
Yep. And now, how does this, again, the Fed increases the money supply, however they do it. One of these three ways. Whichever one they use. Remember how to do it with all three. How does the Fed increase the money supply here?
They buy security.
Right? buying equals increase. How do they increase the money supply here? Lowering the discount rate or
Lowering the ratio.
lowering the required reserve ratio, right? Usually, the Fed saves these two for special occasions only, right? This is the one they play with every day. These are the ones that they play with rarely, right? This one once every quarter or so. This one once every 30 or 40 years, usually. All right. All right. Now, again, I still don't see how this is improving the economy, right? All I've seen is that it's lowered interest rates. How does that improve the economy?
People buy more. People get more.
It increases GDP.
How, though?
Well, if there's more money
People have more
available
money.
to spend,
You're more
Well, I don't see people having more money. All I'm seeing is lower interest rates.
You're more likely to borrow.
Right. So the key here is that lower interest rates make I and a bit of C increase. So what happens in the overall economy? Aggregate demand increases, and there. Have you ever guys seen that therefore technique?
Mm-hmm.
The three dots that make a triangle. Standard symbol in case you ever see it. So if you see three dots that look like a triangle, that means the word therefore. It's a great math thing.
I thought it was shorthand.
It is shorthand, but the mathematicians used it first. The shorthand people stole it from the mathematicians. I know. English people. Grr. All right. Anyways, just in case, and therefore GDP grows, which is of course what we're really looking for if we want to push the economy, growing GDP. All right. So the thing about it for Keynesian economists, right? Remember, Keynesian economists are those economists that think the government should spend money in order to increase the economy. They're okay with the Fed doing this. Okay. The Keynesians like this, but they don't think it's the best way. Keynesian economists look at this and say, well, it works, it's just slow, right? Because the banks have to increase the money supply, and that takes time. And in order for the money supply to grow, well, then we have to wait for the interest rates to go down. And then after the interest rates go down, we have to wait for businesses and consumers to spend more money off of those lower interest rates, and that just takes time.
so they'd really rather use fiscal policy to.
Exactly. Keynesians would really wish that whenever the government, or whenever the economy is in trouble, is to really have the government step in and just spend its way out of it. Right? That's the Keynesian approach. Spend. If we have to borrow money, so what? Do it and then spend. Now, monetarists, or graduated classical economists, look at this and say, oh, this works. Now, it shouldn't be done in excess, but it can work. All right? So one of the things about this is that, let's go black, right? So, Keynesian economists like this, but prefer fiscal policy.
Wait, before you erase that.
Yes.
So of those three things, and we talked about that, is the RRR rarely used because it has the most dramatic effect?
Yes.
And why don't they use it more often? Or why don't they change it more often?
Because it's harder to track. The changes are deeper, and they happen slower.
So when we're in the huge amount of trouble like we were in 2008, for instance, they didn't use that.
No, they didn't. Well, they did. They did use it back then, but they actually used it contrary to what they should have. Right? Back in 2008, they actually had to raise the required reserve ratio to try and protect the banks from themselves. Because the required reserve ratio is sort of a protection for banks so that they have enough cash on hand to cover any bad debts that they make.
Right.
And
so they don't
usually, you expect to have less than 10% of your debts be bad. So that 10% of that required reserve ratio covers it. Banks would do that. That's why there was a big problem.
Right, I knew.
So the Fed actually, at this time, they raised the required reserve ratio, which is what freaked me out a ton.
Yeah, it didn't even make sense.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. I was freaking out. That's why I almost left the country. Yeah, they should have lowered it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if you lower it, what are you doing? You're unregulating the banks even more. And
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
yeah, I mean that's
You're getting more leash.
yeah, they were like sort of like here's more rope to hang yourself with,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So what the Fed did was it said, okay, we'll raise this just a little. It was like 1/10 to a 0.5% for most banks. But then what did they do to the discount rate? The discount rate in 2008 used to be about 5.5%. Now it's less than 1. So that's how they counteracted the required reserve ratio.
So would that be a typical thing to do if they did muck with the R, then do something with the discount rate as well?
Yeah, very, very standard, yes.
Okay.
And then, of course, what else have they been doing for the past 4 years? They've been doing quantitative easing.
But they kind of do that all the time anyway.
They do that all the time, but usually this is a balancing effect. But what they've been doing for the past 4 years has been, every month, buying $20 billion worth of securities. Every month. $20 billion. Every month. For 3 flipping years straight. Again, to try and...
Is that debt to them? I mean, are they like buying their own debt back, or?
No, they're buying government debt. It's actually an even trade. It's just a matter of trading cash for securities. That's all they're doing. It's sort of like you saying, well, you know, I've got, my house is worth $80,000 and I have, assuming that that's worth $80,000 worth of cash. Right, so you go out and get a loan and you borrow $5,000 on your house. In theory, it's not really a loan, right? It's just you taking some of your long-term assets and trading it in for cash. I mean, it is a loan because you have to pay it back,
Gotcha.
but...
Yeah, and they're going to get interest on that too. So.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, you're paying for your own money, basically.
To some degree, yeah. It's all a little bit of a Ponzi scheme, but you know.
Yeah, that's why I never did it.
Scares me too. So, anyways, that's what Keynesians like. Now, the Monetarist, so the new stuff, is looking at this from the classical economist's perspective. Yeah, I'll draw you. So there are these new types of economists that rolled around in the 70s and 80s when Ronald Reagan was president, who sort of came up with this new technique for how to muck with the economy using the money supply, right? And it was a different perspective than the Keynesians, right? The Keynesians were like, well, you know, money supply, yeah, it works, but just not as good as government spending. Monetarists said, you know, that government spending stuff, it freaks us out. Remember that what monetarists say about government spending is the whole crowding out theory, where when the government borrows a whole ton of money, eventually what do people start doing when the government is 17 or 18 trillion dollars in debt? Yeah, they get nervous. They're like, wait a second, we don't want to borrow any more money. We don't want to lend money to the government anymore. We don't trust them. They're never going to pay it back. Look, $18 trillion?
Well, they're either going to never pay it back or raise taxes.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And
Either way, if they raise
either.
taxes, that's scary too, right? Because that's going to tank our
We
economy.
don't want that to happen to our children.
Right. So the monetarists, they hate fiscal policy due to crowding out. So what they do like, right? Now remember classical economists, the classical economists are the old men that used to think that the way to fix the economy is to just keep your frickin' hands off, right? Let the market deal with it, right? Flexible wages and prices will fix everything. We don't have to worry about it. If you just let the economy correct itself, it will. A couple of people will die, or a couple million people will die, or maybe a couple billion people will die, but that's just Darwin, right? We don't mind that. It's part of life, death, right? So if it happens a little bit sooner for some people, tough luck for them. It's not a bad thing to say when you're already old, right? Because you've already survived that stage where you may have been killed, so.
Well, they probably already have.
And they've got so much money that it
They
won't
could
matter,
get
right?
killed
Exactly.
quick.
Anyways, whatever. Regardless, they hate this, but they like monetary policy as a means to correct any big problems in the economy. Normally, monetarists, they're pretty much hands-off people. They would really rather see there be less government, less spending, less everything. But whenever there are problems, don't have the government step in, because the government stepping in just causes problems. One, all this spending stuff, it doesn't work. All it does is it crowds things out. So whenever there's a problem, it's the Fed's job to step in and fix any problems. Now, the way they think it works is through this equation of exchange. So, the way monetarists argue it is like this. Is that the economy is really driven by this equation. Now, there's lots built into this, but for the most part, it's not all that fancy. Alright? M in this equation, right? So each one of these letters is some piece of the macro level economy. M is the money supply. V is the velocity of money, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I'll explain it. What do you think P stands for?
Price.
Prices. And what do you think Q stands for? Quantity, because this is an economics class. Those are what P and Q always stand for. That's when whenever anybody tells you to mind your P's and Q's, start asking about supply and demand. Because that's what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, have to.
They have to be, right? Alright, so this is what monetarists think drives the economy. Now, so this V. Not velocity, but velocity. What does it mean?
Speed
Well,
at which the money gets back into the economic.
Yeah, how quickly a dollar goes through the circle in the circular flow model. So the way monetarists think that the circular flow model works, it's not how quickly does money go to the product market and then to businesses and then to the factor market, but it's more along the lines of how fast does the money change hands, right? If you think about it, right, if I have $20 and I go to the grocery store and I spend that $20 on apples. Those apples, GDP, right? It's $20 worth of GDP. That $20 goes into the grocery store's bank account. What does the grocery store do with that $20?
They want to go buy more apples.
They want to go buy more apples. So they go out to the orchard and they buy $20 worth of apples. When they give the orchard guy $20, what happened to GDP?
Went up.
Went up $20. Well, the orchard guy's now got $20. What's he going to do with the $20?
$20 worth of seed.
$20 worth of seed. So he goes to the seed company and gives the seed company $20 worth of seeds. What does the seed company do with $20?
Puts in their bank account.
They put it in their bank account and they go and try and find 2 scientists or 5 scientists who can make a better apple seed, and they give them $20 to say, create a better apple tree, right? And what do those scientists do with the $20?
Quit.
They go to the store and buy $20 worth of apples.
Exactly, and the whole thing, but how quickly does that happen, right? Is each one of those steps 1 day, 7 days, a month? How quick does that money float around? That's what monetarists are studying, is how fast does money change hands, right? So the velocity of money is really how many times a dollar is spent on GDP in a year. And this is an average. So that's really what monetarists are looking at, is how quickly do we spend our money. And now if we, you know, if you're like me, I've had this $10 bill in my wallet for about 4 weeks now. Because I don't spend money. I'm awful. Monetarists hate me.
Just gonna say that one.
Yeah, because what is this $10 doing? Is it generating any GDP?
Nope.
Nope, it's just sitting there
Story
like
value.
a worthless ass piece of paper. Right? It's not even acting like money. Because I'm not spending it. Money is only money if it's trading hands. Which makes sense, right? So what
But
you
that
should...
doesn't stay consistent, so what does that, I mean, how in the world do they expect that to change or fix the problem just by monitoring how fast that goes around?
Well, what they say is that you can't adjust this, but what you can do is measure and then adjust this instead.
Well,
So-
then they shouldn't both be on the same side of the equal.
Oh no, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. What is price times quantity?
Price times quantity?
Yeah,
It's the end result of the demand.
right, it's a result of the demand. Basically, price times quantity represents how much you have created in a year. Basically, it's your GDP.
You can whisper, probably not supposed to read it.
Right? P times Q, the price of all of our goods times the amount of goods that we've created, that's our GDP, right? If we made 100,000 cars and they were all worth $20,000 each, then we made $20 million worth of, GDP. So it's just price times quantity. So in other words, if you want GDP to grow, V is the velocity of money. We can measure that, we can't change it. We try to, but we really can't. We can't make people like me spend their money. Doesn't work. But we can change the money supply. So what the Fed tries to do is it measures the velocity of money and it increases or decreases the money supply to try and make this number go up by a good amount, right? So this is GDP. We want GDP to grow by like 3.5%. We know what this number is. To make this number grow by 3%, change this number so that that's what happens. That's what monetarists think you can do to fix the economy. Just play with money.
Seems a little complicated because that's so inconsistent. Because there might be a lot of money out there that could be spent, but people don't spend.
Exactly. So the velocity of money will fall.
There could
And
be a
that's
lot of money out there and people are spending it, in which case causes a shortage of money.
exactly, right? But that's exactly what the monetarists are doing. They're saying every month what we should be measuring is how fast is money being spent. If the money is not being spent, if boneheads like Marshall are hanging on to their $10 bill instead of spending it, what we need to do is force more money out there and make sure that the people who do spend money keep spending it. And make sure that M times V makes GDP go up. Because this isn't an identity, that's what a mathematician would call it. Which is a great word. But again, all it means is that this is a truth. That if this product goes up by 3%, so will this. Hence, GDP goes up by 3%. This number, we can measure it on average. Because that's what they're doing. That's what the Fed's doing, is measuring how fast is money being spent. They can see it. So adjust M to make sure that this value is growing, right? So change M to make sure that M times V grows by acceptable amounts. Now, acceptable is a little, iffy, right? Because in theory then, the Fed could increase the money supply by like double the money supply. And in theory, that could force GDP to grow, twice as fast as it normally would. Would you want the economy to do that?
Probably not.
Probably not. And in fact, that's the other thing that monetarists and classical economists want is steady growth, right? So what they really want to see is acceptable is that number, is a 3.5% increase. And that's really what the monetarists think the Fed should do, is just basically figure out what the money supply should be at so that GDP grows 3.5%. Make the money supply that much and then see if it works. And if it doesn't, then probably our calculation for velocity was off, will adjust slightly. And that's what they're doing, right? So anytime they increase the money to try and increase GDP, if it doesn't work, it's because this number fell. Again, they gave that $10 to me, and I'm not a good person in the economy because I don't spend my money fast enough.
Not a good American.
I'm not. I'm probably the economist.
Well, I mean, you could take what that scenario is and apply it to, the unemployment versus employed. I mean, that goes up and down. So it's
it's the
it
same.
Seems like it's such a long shot.
Well, I mean, it's a
long shot view of really getting a steady 3.5.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Again, it's one of those that it averages, and they understand that it's gonna, some weeks or months or quarters it'll, but that on average we should be seeing that good 3.5% growth. And what a monetarist would say right now, the reason that we're not growing at 3.5% is not because the economy is faltering, but because the Fed really hasn't raised the money supply enough. If they would just raise the money supply a little bit faster, this would push spending a little bit more, and we would see growth of 3.5%.
So with their philosophy there, I mean, what would you say the parameters are, as far as getting as close as they can to 3.5? Is it like no less than 2%, no more than 5%?
Yep, something around those lines, yep. So when the Fed sees
it
growth in
hasn't-
a quarter of 2%, they're like, hey, that wasn't too bad. Now, they would like it to be more, obviously, but they don't want it to be 8, because if it grows at 8%, then you're looking at probably inflation, and they don't want that either, so they have to balance a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And this equation was like butter in the 80s and 90s, right? When Reagan was president, the Fed watched this stuff and it worked like a charm. I mean, it was spot on. They had nice, steady growth in the 80s and 90s for GDP overall. Now, there was a lot of inflation floating around that they had to fight it with it, but the growth in actual real GDP was wonderfully steady during that time period. Now, unfortunately, what ends up happening, right, is that people who understand what the Fed is doing, they see what they're doing, right? They're trying to adjust the money based on the velocity, and when they see that the Fed is measuring this velocity number, what do they do when they see that that number goes down? Well, they know the Fed is going to increase the money supply. What do? You take advantage of it, right? You start saying, oh, I'm going to start hoarding a whole bunch of government securities because I know the Fed's buying them all up. And all I have to do is wait for them to push the price of them up. And when I'm ready to take my profit, I'll say, oh, you want to buy more because you still need to increase the money supply? Great, here's mine at an inflated price. Right? Lots of people scream and bitch about how come the Fed is so secretive. The reason why is because if we know what the Fed's going to do, what do we do as human beings?
Take advantage of it.
We take advantage of it. And what have bankers and large fund people been doing over the past 3 years because the Fed has become more transparent?
Taking advantage.
And hence we have the rich get even richer, and us, who now know what the Fed's doing and look at it and go, oh yeah, if I had $3 million, I could take advantage of this. But do any of you have $3 million laying around? Mm-hmm. Well, shit, I'm your friend if you do. Right? I mean, that's the problem, in my opinion, of what transparency with the Fed is. I like the fact that the Fed is a private industry that doesn't tell us what's going to go on and just says after the fact, hey guys, look, this is what we're going to do. Adjust accordingly. Because if you know what they're going to do, you can take advantage of it if you have enough money. And of course, this is why everybody's screaming for the Fed to be more transparent so that they can take advantage of it. So, again though, it's a great theory, it's a wonderful theory because it works, And it actually has worked in the past. It's just that now with people knowing what's happening, it's a little bit harder for it to work because people are kind of taking advantage of it. Now, that takes care of the monetarists, right? So they like this policy. They think it's very good. So there are still classical economists who believe that really the Fed shouldn't do anything. Technically, just so that you know, they're often called neoclassical economists now, because neo, it's a Greek prefix that means new. So really they're supposed to be different, but their philosophy is the same as it always has been, but they put a neo in front of it to make them sound different.
It's to make themselves
Yeah, basically. So if you hear the term neoclassical, please realize that they're just talking about classical economists. People who think that the government and the Fed should just F off and not do anything with the economy, right? Just leave it alone, right? Leave the economy alone, right? Remember, their goal is if everybody would just F off and we would just have flexible wages and prices, the economy would always recover from any recession that it has. Has to, because it always has. According to classical economists who listen to monetarists talking about this equation, they say, you know, that's a good equation. We agree with that equation, but they believe, classical economists believe, velocity and quantity are fixed. They don't change, right? So monetarists think that the velocity of money changes, right? That people's spending habits change. So when you get $20, depending on how good you feel about the economy, you may or may not spend it sooner or later. Classical economists say when you get 20 bucks, you're going to spend it exactly the same way you've spent it your entire life, right? If it takes you a month to spend $20, it will always take you a month to spend $20, no matter how much money you're making, period. Okay? Because once you're set in your ways, you're set in your ways. I mean, think about a bunch of old white men. What are we going to do? Yeah, I mean, once we've figured out how we are.
We're creatures of habit.
Oh, hell yeah, we are. The older I get, the more I'm like, damn it, that's change. I can't handle that. Quit it, right? I mean, I'm going to be one of those old white men someday.
Just like these people, okay, they come home, they got a pocket full of change. They have this jar.
Exactly.
And they always put that change in that jar.
Exactly. And then what do they do?
Does that ever change? No.
Nope.
They always
Exactly.
come in and put that change
Right.
in the jar. Do they spend it? No. It just sits there.
It sits there until the end of every year. What do they do with the change?
Put it in the savings
Go
account.
take to the bank and say, and then
Is that increasing
Exactly.
GDP?
Nope.
Okay.
So that's what classical economists think, is that once we are set in our ways, we're set in our ways, we're not going to change anything. So these two are the only things that can change. So if we increase the money supply, what happens?
The
Prices will go up.
Prices are going to go up. If we decrease the money supply, what happens?
Prices go down.
Prices are going to go down. So the Fed, according to classical economists, this is what monetary policy does. It just creates inflation. That's it. That's all it does. So quit it. Just stop it. So when you become a Fed worker, all the old white men are going to be telling you, quit doing anything, because all you're doing is making inflation. Darn it. And I expect you to be working the Fed in about 5 years, Ken, so I can bitch at you. All right, so this is their belief, right? So changes in money supply only change inflation. So this really clears up or finishes off how monetary policy works according to the three types of economists. Keynesians, they're okay with it, but it's too slow. Monetarists, that's their goal, right? I mean, you should expect someone who's called a monetarist to like monetary policy, so that should be relatively straightforward. And again, though, remember that it works through this equation of exchange. By increasing the M such that M times V grows, we make GDP grow what we want it to. And then, of course, the classical economists who say poo-poo on everything because change is bad. That's monetary policy, folks. And really, that's the end of national macroeconomics, okay? The last thing we're going to do Wednesday is talk about international economics. We'll talk about that just a little, just a day's worth. Just enough to make you scary. Give you enough knowledge so that you can be dangerous. It's always.
When are you going to have our practice tests?
Today. I actually was updating them so that I could put them on this afternoon. So hopefully sometime this afternoon, the study guide and all of the little practice questions for the final will be available to you. So the last thing I want to do today about Chapter 20 is just review what all the different types of economists like and don't like, and why.
Is our final the same as our midterm?
Yep.
Like same amount of questions?
Yep. 10 short answer, or 10 multiple choice, 50 multiple choice, 10 short answer, graphic type stuff. You guys remember, right, that the first 10 multiple choice questions copied straight out of the midterm?
Yeah.
And then the next 40 will be generic. Same with the short answer, the first 3 or so questions will be not straight out of the midterm, but same type of questions, change the words, change some of the numbers. You know, basically me asking you if a supplementary good or, you know, if a complementary good's price goes up, what happens to the price of the good itself, right? You know, all that stuff. If taxes go up on a product, what happens to the product, right? What happens to quantity and demand? What happens to price and quantity, that kind of stuff.
Are you going to write the non-price determinants in the board again?
Yes. Actually, I'll probably give you a hint. All right, so. Okay, so there are 2 types of methods that we can use to muck with the economy: fiscal policy and monetary policy. And there are 3 types of economists. Keynesians, the monetarists,
Neoclassic.
and technically the neo-classicalists, because they're new now, even though they're old.
The new old.
Yeah, the new old. It's not an oxymoron. It's like government intelligence. There's lots of that going around.
Just new people looking at the old policy.
So Keynesian economists, do they like fiscal policy?
Yes, they do.
Yes, we like it. Why? How does it work? What do they believe makes things happen through this?
Government spends a lot of money,
Pushes
fixes
money.
the economy.
How? What makes it? Why does government spending lead to growth in GDP?
Because of the equation. What is it? C plus I plus G.
True. But is GDP going to grow by the exact amount that the government spends?
No.
No, it's going to grow more than that. Why?
The money multiplier.
The spending multiplier. Right. Spending multiplier makes GDP grow even more than the government spending itself, right? So when the government spends money, it goes out into the economy and it goes to the circular flow model, and each time it keeps multiplying a little bit more and adding a little bit more and adding a little bit more. The more it circles and circles and circles and circles. And so the growth in GDP is always more than the government spending because of the multiplier, right? And it could, if they don't want to use the spending multiplier, what can they use instead if they want to get elected, re-elected? The taxing multiplier. Is the taxing multiplier as effective?
No.
Not quite. What's the relationship between the spending multiplier and the taxing multiplier? Right. Subtract 1, right? Remember the spending multiplier, if it's 5, the taxing multiplier is 4, because taxing is just not as effective, because you people aren't as good at spending money as the government. Not good, not bad necessarily, but it is what it is. Monetarists, what do they think of fiscal policy?
They're okay, but nah, they don't like it.
They do not like it, right?
They'd rather see.
Don't like it due to the claim.
Crowding out effect, right. Crowding out effect will make interest rates rise and spending fall. And on top of it, it ruins how their monetary policy works, which is what they really like, right? So in order for monetary policy work, you have to have flexible interest rates. And if the crowding out effect is screwing with interest rates, then the one thing that we like is now screwed. Neoclassicals, do they like fiscal policy?
No.
Do not like it. Again, just creates inflation. Again, remember that classical economists always assume that we're at full employment. So by pushing aggregate demand, all you're doing is making prices higher, right? Remember the 3 stages of aggregate supply? What are the 3 stages?
Keynesian,
Keynesian.
traditional, and classical.
Intermediate and classical, and what does it look like?
Curve up.
So remember, here's how aggregate supply always looks. Keynesian, intermediate, classical. These are what the classical economists are always looking at. They're saying aggregate supply is always at full employment. If anybody's not working, they're dead. That's what classical economists think. So if you push aggregate demand to the right, all you're doing is increasing inflation. It doesn't do anything. Please quit it. All right? So, Keynesians in monetary policy, what do they say?
They're okay with it.
Yeah, it's
Do it a little
okay.
bit. Do it a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Don't try and
It
fix
works.
it. Try.
But not as well.
But it's too darn slow. This works way faster, right? If you can get the government to pass a $3 trillion spending package and you spend $3 trillion, dude, the economy is going to turn around, right? But if you say, well, let's increase the money supply and then wait for interest rates to fall and then wait for businesses to go, oh, look, lower interest rates, great, let's spend more money. Is that going to work? Well, yeah.
Over time.
But it's just, right? So they tend to say it works, but fiscal is better. It's a nice addition if the fiscal policy that is not really available to you, right? And since that's what happened in 2008, 2009, right? Initially, the Fed's changes were small because the government had agreed to spend an additional $1.2 trillion. And they hoped that would be enough. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And so they had to be more aggressive afterwards. So, what do monetarists think about monetary policy?
You like it, but don't use it to correct big problems.
Yeah, like it. Use it to fix big problems. Otherwise, pretty much let the economy fix itself, right? I mean, they really are classical economists. They would really rather see there be less mucking around going on, right? And that the job of the Fed is really to say, ooh, there's a big problem. Let's push some money out there until the problem goes away. And if the government would just keep its hands out of our pants, everything would be fine. Less taxes out of our pants. That's what I was talking about. All right, and what do neoclassical economists say?
Don't like
Don't like it. Leave it alone.
That's right.
Just
Not like it. What does monetary policy do?
Just increasing inflation.
That's right.
They're not big math fans. That's their problem. They don't want to do all that arithmetic.
That's right. Screw all this math crap. We know that M and P are directly related to each other. If you increase the money supply, you increase prices. Stop it. Right?
Stop doing it.
So, what to do to fix a recession? What do then Keynesian economists recommend we do to fix a recession?
Government's been-
Right. Government spending. And maybe Fed increase M2.
Or lower discount.
Or lower the discount.
Or
Lower the required reserve rate. Right, exactly. What would monetarists say we should do to fight a recession?
oh hey, increase the money supply.
That's right. Increase M2
Lower interest rates.
so that MV equals PQ grows PQ. Right? Remember, PQ equals GDP. And what do neoclassical economists say we should do to fight a recession?
Oh my
Leave it
God.
alone.
Nothing.
Hope for the best.
Let a bunch of people die.
Do nothing. Right. Let flexible wages and prices do the work, right? So, what happens if we get to the other side of the world?
So let me ask you this real quick.
Okay.
So through, let's say, late 40s, 50s, 60s,
Okay. 40s, 50s, 60s.
was the classical view pretty much what policy was going by?
Nope. Mostly Keynesian.
Mostly Keynes.
Yep.
Because those were good times.
Sure.
Those were when the economy just kind of cruised along.
Yep.
People had money. You see a whole lot of poverty. There were jobs.
There was some floating around, but
Yeah, but not like it is.
it's just a little bit more visual today.
You
Again,
hear about it more than you do now.
yeah. The problem with or not the problem, but what's different about today than it was back in the 40s, 50s, 60s is that there are extreme news agencies that let us know about the extremes that are happening. In the 40s and 50s, there were 4 channels to choose from on TV, right? I mean, you got ABC, NBC, CBS, and maybe a local news channel somewhere.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, when you look at like the middle class, okay,
Yeah.
the amount of middle class,
Define
I know,
middle
that
class,
you
and
can't
that's the
really-
problem, right? I mean,
you can't,
if you
but-
can't, right? Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, if you were making $20,000 a year, you were considered middle class.
Yeah,
If you're making $20,000 a year today, folks,
You're-
shit, man. I
you're
mean,
poverty.
yeah, you're in poverty, right? I mean, especially if you've got 2 or 3 kids on that, man.
Well, even trying to support yourself.
Yeah, even by yourself, 20 grand stuff. I mean, you can do it, but good luck having any fun, right? Or kind of fun you have is free. So, okay. Inflation. How do Keynesians think we should fight inflation? So when the economy is really zooming and prices are going up, what do we got to do?
Lower interest rates.
What do Keynesians like best?
Spending money.
Spending money. But now the problem is we're spending too much. So what do we have to do?
Spend less.
Stop spending.
Spend less. So this one is cut government spending. Or raise taxes. So it's still fiscal policy, it's just the other direction, right? So think about the late 90s, right before the Y2K issue, which we had problems with, right? 96 through 98, we were buzzing along real nice. Inflation was starting to go up a little bit too high. What did the government start doing? They started holding things back, and they started increasing taxes a little bit. Right? What do monetarists think we should do when we have inflation?
Decrease them too.
Exactly. They still think that the money supply is the way to go. Play around with the money supply. Again, the idea here is that PQ is growing too fast, right? And that probably most of the growth is coming in P instead of in Q, because really the growth that we can get in our infrastructure, right, in the amount that we can produce, can it grow 10% in a year? I mean, given how big we already are, can we create 10% more factory output in a year? Might, but could it really happen in a year? That's tough. Right? So if you see growth that fast, it's probably going to come more in prices instead of quantity, and that's the problem, right? Again, so that MV equals PQ grows at close to 3.5%, right? And that's really what it always wants. I mean, that's its goal. Monetarists want to see nice, steady growth, not big, huge bursts. Right? Monetarists would actually look at China and India right now with GDP growing at 7-8% and say, well, that sucks. That's bad. Because I guarantee you that a lot of that growth is coming in prices, not in output. Cut back. Right? Of course, China can look at it and say that's impossible because China has a tight control of their money supply and they say that it's fixed. So any growth that they see has to be in output. And that's if you believe their government sees. What do neoclassicalists say you should do to fight inflation?
Nothing.
It's great to be a neoclassicalist.
I must be one
Very lazy.
No, they're not lazy. They are just vociferous. You complain about it and say, you should really do less. Right? Anytime you do anything, well, damn it, quit it. That's the problem, because you did something.
It was working just fine before you did it.
Exactly right. I mean, come on. The healthcare system we had prior to this Obamacare stuff, it was perfect. We had the best healthcare in the world. Ask anybody, right?
That not from anywhere else.
Yeah. Again, neoclassicals will say, well, when the economy booms, essentially what will happen is that, yes, everyone will get a raise, and everyone will also increase production, and that the flexible wages and prices will cut that growth down to a reasonable 3.5% if you just let it. All right? So one of the things that I want you to be able to do is potentially, if I throw you into one of these categories, for you to be able to respond to an economic event as this economist would. So I may say, you are now a classical economist, Shannon. And I tell you, there's inflation flowing around. What would you say?
Don't do anything.
Yeah, you would put your arms on your chest and say,
Just
quit doing anything. You're making my bunions hurt.
In that case, can we just leave the question blank?
Don't make me have to go
Well,
talk
right,
to
so now you're
Congress.
doing something.
Yeah, quit doing something. Damn it. Yeah. So anyways, this table is a wonderful table. There's a version of it in the text, very similar to it, that goes over what the different types of economists there are and the types of things that they like and do. All right. So again, be able to talk about the spending multiplier, be able to talk about how the crowding out effect works, be able to explain how monetary works according to the Keynesians, right? That two-step process, increasing the money supply, lowering interest rates, increasing aggregate demand. And that here, the monetarists say, hey, don't forget MV equals PQ, right? Growth in M leads to growth in P and Q. So when the economy starts to slow down, increase the money supply enough so that M times V goes up and everything will be fixed. Right? And it's a little bit of magic, but it's magic that has worked in the past. And of course, yes, remember that the classicalists are always do nothing. But remember that the reason why, this is their mantra, they chant it over and over and over again, right? That's what they're always saying, is if you would just let wages and prices be flexible again, all in the world would be okay. Right? Of course, how that could happen anymore, I'm not really sure, but in theory, right? I mean, this is the Rand and what's Rand Paul's son's name? Two Pauls, whoever they are, but they're the two very much so classical economists that still exist in the economy today. They're Ron and Rand Paul are both in the House, Kentucky, I think, and they both believe that the government should just get the hell out of Dodge, right? The job for the government is to build up the army and shoot people. Or take care of our borders or whatever, right? Build a bigger wall. And more guards on the wall. And thicker walls. And then taller walls. And then more guards on the wall.
And do it all without spending any money.
Well, with as little money as possible, right? So pay those guards in, pesos or something like that, right? Instead of
But then they'd have to be on the other side.
True. Alright, so let me see. Alright, so that is the end of chapter 20. Let's see. I have some numbers down here. Let's make sure those are good numbers. This will be the last homework assignment, folks. I'm not going to assign any homework from chapter 21 because we're going to be doing that last day. So, homework, chapter 20. What page is it again?
446.
Is it 447? Is that?
We should give this question one.
Let's do numbers 4, 5, and 10. So the quiz on Wednesday, last quiz, will be on chapter 20. Basically asking you, how does monetary policy work? And then potentially what do each of the type of economists like and not like to fix the macroeconomy? And what are the three goals of the macroeconomy again? Stable prices,
Increase GDP.
increased GDP,
Full employment.
full employment. Okay, remember those three.
Is that multiple choice or are you going to go with the table?
For what? Oh no, it'll probably be multiple choice. Alright. Let's call it early today if you guys don't mind.